All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of Wide Open with Ashlyn Harris. Today, I am so excited to be talking to Yale professor, scientist, podcaster, and happiness expert, Dr. Laurie Santos. Dr. Santos, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. What an important time right now. It's so good to meet you, be here with you. You are the guru. Everyone talks about you. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It's an honor.
I'm just curious to start the show by saying, who are you? How do you show up in the world outside of what you do? Because that's a big, important factor of this show.
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the reasons I study happiness and study well-being is that, I'm curious about it in my own life, right?
Yes.
This is something that, I occasionally struggle with a lot. I got really interested in the science of happiness in part because I was seeing such mental health issues in my college students, right? I mean, right now, nationally, more than 40% of college students report being too depressed to function. Over 60% say that they're overwhelmingly anxious. Our students are struggling. But the reason I really got into this was that I was noticing some of the same patterns in myself. I wasn't experiencing suicidality or clinical depression, but I was just watching stress and overwhelm just take the joy out of the stuff that I was experiencing in life. And I just thought, if I need to teach my students skills to deal with this stuff, but I also need to learn these skills for myself. And so part of my journey that sounds scientific and sounds nerdy and guru-y and whatever is really a journey to kind of help myself to try to learn from myself what are the things that really matter in life.
And it's such an important thing to talk about because everyone just expects it. Everyone just expects us to be happy, even though we live in this really complex culture and world where things are very different than they used to be.
Completely.
And
yeah.
I'm curious though, what got you here? Before we dive into the incredible work you do as a scientist, professor, what got you here? What was the driving factor to say, this is what I want to do, this matters, and this will change the landscape of how people are on the pursuit of happiness?
Yeah. Well, for me, it started, my little girl, career path was I think I was always a psychologist at heart. I was always curious about people, especially curious about adults. I was the little kid that the parents would be get out of here, go play with your friends, stop paying attention to us. So I think I was sort of fascinated by human nature, ever since I was a little kid. And so, that naturally drew me, and it was a nerdy academic to study psychology. When I first started, I was really interested in this question about what makes the human mind special. Why are you and I here having a podcast where we talk about going wide open and no other, chimpanzee or amoeba is doing the same thing, right? Why are we the only species that gets to do this fun stuff? And so I spent a lot of my time studying animals, trying to figure out what makes humans unique. I work with this kind of strange population of monkeys that lives on an island off the coast of Puerto Rico, studying them and comparing them with humans. I just spent a lot of time studying these very ivory tower questions. But it was really interacting with my students where I started to realize how many young people were struggling that I thought, my field of psychology might have some answers for this stuff. I started to realize that the skills that people were studying in this field of positive psychology, those are the kinds of things that everybody should learn about. And so I think my transition happened from kind of being more of an ivory tower professor to thinking about okay, how can we translate these skills into easy ways that people can use this stuff? How can we communicate this stuff outside the university so that everybody who's struggling in this world, as you mentioned, which especially in the modern day is so tough, how can we give everybody these tools?
Oh, and I love that. And you know what I love so much about who you are and how you show up and how you've dedicated your life to this work is you make it really digestible. You make it easy to understand for everyday people wanting the same thing, joy and happiness. And I'm curious with that, is there a difference between joy and happiness?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, one of the things we have to start with when we develop this science of happiness is like to get some definitions on the table. And so
Mm,
let's first like talk about how scientists define happiness, because it tends to be a little bit different, I think, than how lay people think about happiness. So scientists define happiness as this sense of being happy in your life and being happy with your life. So let's break that down. So being
mm,
happy in your life is sort of the extent to which you have lots of positive emotions and have a decent ratio between your positive emotions and your negative emotions. It doesn't mean happiness doesn't mean having no negative emotions. I think we'll talk about this. The negative emotions are normative. We don't want to get into toxic positivity. Like we want them to be there, but
mm,
ideally you balance them out with a set of good emotions, right? Being happy with your life is just your sense that like things feel good. You're satisfied with your life. You have a sense of meaning and purpose. You kind of think your life is going well. So scientists call this the kind of affective or emotional part of happiness and the kind
mm,
of cognitive or sort of thinking part of happiness. Now we get to joy and how that's different. I would say that joy is sort of an emotional state, kind of that being happy in your life part that so many of us need to experience, right? So it's kind of one component of being happy, but scientists would think about it differently. And so the goal of all the work that I do is to figure out, okay, what are some tips and strategies, behaviors, mindsets that we can engage in to make us a little bit more happy in our lives and hopefully a little bit more happy with our lives too.
mm, mm. I love that. And, I'm thinking in real time and why this conversation is so valuable for me personally. As you might know, I am a newly retired professional athlete. I was lucky enough to be asked to speak um, at the Wellness Oasis with Deepak Chopra
Mhm,
and Art Basel. And what my topic on stage was about joy and happiness.
mhm,
And in the landscape, the current landscape, how do we show up and choose joy and happiness? And I got really candid and I got really open because I think faking joy and happiness is really toxic.
completely. Yeah.
And I got really vulnerable and I like really got wide open in front of a lot of people. And I said, um, happiness is really difficult and joy is really difficult for me personally as a professional athlete because of my job, because of the expectation of my job. I don't know what happiness is. I don't know what joy is because if I wasn't suffering, I wasn't doing my job.
Mhm.
And it really like gave me whiplash in a lot of ways. And I left that and I was like, wow, what does happiness mean to me? Did I even enjoy my career?
Yeah.
I win a world championship. Great. Did that, check the box. I don't even sit in it to enjoy it and the journey, the hard work.
Yeah. This is a bias that psychologists call the arrival fallacy, where when
Oof.
we're kind of planning for something, we kind of get in our head, I'm going to get that national championship, and that'll be it. I'll kind of be like happily ever after. When I arrive at that point, I'll be good. But then we get there, and what the research shows is it doesn't make us as happy as we think, and it doesn't make us as happy for as long as we think. And then I think we're kind of like, it's that whiplash you talked about like, now I'm blindsided. What's the next thing? Well, I guess I need to get an international championship, or I need to win the next one, or I need to like, be MVP or whatever it is. We just like immediately jump on to the next carrot.
Mm.
And I think that, like for you as a professional athlete, those carrots were, accolades in your sport. I think for other people, it can be money, it can be trying to find the perfect relationship, getting married, getting that next promotion at work. I think so many of us fall prey to this arrival fallacy where we're not enjoying the journey at all. We just have this kind of, this carrot in the future in our minds and we chase there. But even in the rare cases where we get it, when we achieve the excellence we wanted, we're not satisfied with that. We just move on to the next hurdle.
And I unfortunately think our culture now has really affected our ability to be present. You talk about social media, you talk about, these kids at a very early age, just like you said, whether it's athletics or academic, these kids are being professionalized at such a young age.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like when I grew up playing, I played everything. Like when I think about my childhood, I do think about happiness and I do think about joy because I didn't have the expectation of being the greatest, to win these championships, to pave the way for all these young women looking up, to our team and us as athletes and individuals. I just don't see kids playing outside like I did as a
Yeah.
young child. Has this really affected our children and how they see themselves and how they view happiness?
Yeah, for sure. A former Stanford dean has christened this term cages of enrichment, right? The idea is like, you want to give your kid, I don't know, access to the best like soccer team so they can play and get good at it. But because all of these kinds of things that we're doing to help kids feel like there's kind of pre-professional, that they're kind of very goal oriented, that you have to kind of get to the point and be excellent all the time, it's almost like a cage. Like, yeah, they're getting this sort of enrichment, but they're sort of trapped in it, right?
Mm.
And I think that you're exactly right that this kind of thing is happening more and more and more, from athletics to academics. I mean, I talk to so many of my student athletes who will say things like, like kind of like in this moment of like sort of sharing a deep dark secret of like, I hate my sport, like I
Hmm.
hate it, I just don't want to do it anymore. And it's so incredible that these students who dedicated so much time to being excellent at this thing, hate this thing that they've become excellent at. And I just think that's just such an indictment of our culture right now. And in some ways, an indictment of parenting. I think parents sometimes get a lot wrapped up in this sort of carrot chasing and really want their kids to be excellent at whatever they're doing. And so I think parents need to step away and ask the question, okay, do you really want that excellence at the cost of your kids' mental health, at the cost of their enjoyment, at the cost of their kind of relishing the journey along the way?
And I love that you bring that point up because it is really important to me. And I get this question a lot is these parents like bombard me and are like, what advice can you give my child? Your child's 8.
Yeah, like, yes, exactly. It's
My
like,
advice is to you. My advice is exactly what you said. This is supposed to be the best time of their life. And I'm like, they should just be having fun.
yeah. And what we know, one of the things we know about the power of fun, the power of playfulness, right, which is often how
Mm.
it's defined, right, which is that you're doing something not for some extrinsic reward, like you're trying to get a trophy, you're trying to, get into a good college. You're just doing it for the intrinsic internal enjoyment of things. Research shows that the more we play, especially when we're young, the better we develop stress coping strategies. That just like doing things that you enjoy can help you kind of gain resilience when the tough stuff in life comes up. Not to mention it's also just like fun. So it makes you feel good and gives you positive emotions. And I think you're right. I think we really have moved away from fun. And it kind of raises the question of like, okay, if you're kind of a person like you who's been doing this for so long, how do you snap out of it? How do you get back to what researchers call a journey mindset, where you're kind of not
Mm.
waiting for the arrival, but sort of enjoying the journey along the way? How do you fight back against these cultural tendencies?
Oh, and I love that. And this is, on the show Wide Open, as I shared with you about a very humbling moment for me now trying to understand my identity outside of sport.
Hmm.
I think that conversation of joy and happiness really split me wide open. And I ask every person on this podcast show that, what was the defining moment in your life that really split you wide open, that really changed everything for you, that made you sit back and be like, oh, like this is going to make or break me?
Hmm. Hmm.
What was that moment for you?
Yeah, well, I think it came a little bit after I sort of dove into this field of the science of happiness. As I mentioned, I was, working really closely with these students. I was actually living with them on campus in this role as a head of college on campus. This is
Mm.
this kind of weird role at Yale where you're like, as a faculty member, you live with students and eat with them in the dining hall, and kind of you're just like in student life much more closely. And that was where I started to see really this college student mental health crisis up close and personal, right? So I developed this new class. The idea was I'm teaching students all these great strategies, my class went a little bit viral because everybody pays attention to what's happening at Yale. And I think there was this question about like, oh my gosh, these kids who are 19 and at Yale University, if they are all desperate to take a class on happiness, like, what about the rest of us? So there's news articles, I started my podcast, which kind of came soon after that, and juggling being a professor, being a head of college, being a podcast host, being an expert and a speaker on happiness. And that was when the pandemic hit. And, there was a lot more, need for folks who were interested in science and want to talk. And honestly, I just got really burned out, especially the part about running this college on campus when we had kind of unceremoniously kicked everyone out for COVID. It was just really hard. And I just started to notice all the kind of clinical signs of burnout, the one we think about, which is a sense of emotional exhaustion, but it's not like the usual physical exhaustion. It's like, even if you take a break, you just kind of can't you're just emotionally not able to keep doing it. That's sort of clinical sign number one. Clinical sign number two is what folks call depersonalization, but it's really a sense of cynicism. It's just like everybody is getting on your last nerve, right? You just sort of interpret everyone around you's intentions as bad, right? And I noticed this in a kind of really embarrassing moment that I've talked about before, but it still kind of strikes me when I talk about it. As a head of college, you often get, emergency situations from students who might need, finances or need something. And I got an email from a student that I was really close with, who desperately needed a root canal, right? His tooth was all messed up. He needed some money for a root canal. And instead of what I hope would be my usual reaction of just compassion, I'm like, oh, this poor kid, he's in the middle of midterms and he, so sucks, my immediate reaction was like, oh, I have to send another damn email. And I was like, whoa, like that is, something's wrong there. Like I need to kind of think about this, and so that was clinical sign number 2 of my burnout. And then clinical sign number 3 is that you experience what researchers call a sense of personal ineffectiveness, which is this idea that like, even if I was doing my job perfectly, even if I was hitting every mark, every deadline, it still wouldn't matter. It still would kind of feel meaningless. And that was really happening during COVID, where I'm like, what are we even doing, like running a college where everyone's like on screens and Zooms and there's no athletics, right? There's no, music, there's no anything happening on campus. And so it was really that moment, when I got that email and had that reaction that I was like, I have to make change. Like I am not living up to all this stuff that I'm teaching other people. And so I stepped away from my role as a head of college. I took an unpaid year leave from Yale. I really tried to get more in touch with kind of what I was doing wrong and the spots where I wasn't following my own advice. And that was really transformative, right? I think I got back into social connection. I developed some better self-talk strategies to give myself, a little self-compassion despite being a kind of perfectionist in my own ways. I think it was really important. It was an important realization, and it's been a journey since then for me.
And I'm sure it took a lot to get to the place of understanding what burnout actually is and having enough like agency over your own mental health and well-being to say, I need to put myself first.
Yeah.
Which, a lot of people don't understand, themselves enough, or don't have the ability to take a step back to say, I'm heading into this place and I really need a reset.
Yep. Yeah.
So
and I think another thing is that, we mentioned a little bit negative emotions before. I think, especially people, kind of type A folks who push themselves, I throw professional athletes into this category, right? With all you talked about suffering, it's kind of like whenever you experience a negative emotion, it can be like inconvenient. Like, oh, that sense of overwhelm I'm feeling right now, that sense of burnout. Don't have time for that on this random Tuesday. Like, gonna push that away, right? And I think what I came to realize is that our negative emotions are kind of like the dashboard light in our car. If your tire light goes on or your engine light goes on, that's inconvenient. You might not be able to pull over right at that second to deal with it. But like, unless you deal with it soon and take it seriously, your car is going to get much more messed up. And I think our bodies and our minds wind up getting much more messed up when we're not listening to our negative emotions, because they're like an alert signal, right? If we're experiencing loneliness, that's telling you something important about you need a little bit more social connection. If you're experiencing a sense of overwhelm at work or burnout, that's a really important signal that you got to take something off your plate. If you're experiencing sometimes resistance, this is the thing I think some of my student athletes were feeling of like, I hate my sport. I'm like, that is an honest signal that something about this relationship and this dynamic and your values have to change, right? And so I think we ignore those negative emotions at our peril, even if they're ones that are really inconvenient. That suggests, a big wide open change needs to come. We still need to pay attention to those.
Oh, absolutely. So what would you say is like the biggest misconception about happiness?
Yeah, well, we talked about one of them, right? Which is this idea that happiness is really about no negative emotions, right? That's toxic positivity. That's just wrong. A rich, good life is going to include negative emotions because they're your signal for what you really need to kind of experience more joy and be more satisfied with your life. I think a different misconception is that happiness is all about your circumstances, right? It's what you achieve in life. It's your money, it's your accolades, it's, you got that national championship. But those things just don't impact our happiness for as long or for as much as we even think. And so I think that's honestly the biggest misconception I see in my students is like, I have to change something in my life or get something or earn something or win something to feel happy. And study after study just shows that's not it.
So trust me, I live this and I love your work so much. And my brain right now is just literally doing cartwheels or jumping jacks. I really don't know which one, but something in between. What are like the tangible things that people can do to get to a place of happiness? Like how when you are doing your work and you're talking to people like me, I'll be very honest. I feel more at home in suffering than I do in happiness.
Yeah.
Not looking for like a therapy session, but I think a lot of people feel this because the journey to happiness is like not as easy. Like people get so comfortable in suffering and so comfortable in misery. And so at home in that space of being in the trenches, I'm just curious of what are actionable steps that we could be taking or checking ourselves or rewiring our self-talk and self-worth to putting one foot in front of the other and really practicing the art of happiness.
Yeah, well, a big step is changing your mindset, changing your self-talk, as you mentioned. And I think there's a couple of things we can start with, right? One is if you're kind of in the mindset of suffering and that's what you gravitate towards, it'll take your mind a little bit of training to notice some of the good stuff in the world. So this has often been called like a gratitude practice where you try to notice the things that you're grateful for. If that feels heavy, which it does for some people, I like to suggest a slightly different practice, which is to notice the delights in the world. Like gratitude can feel really heavy of like, oh my gosh, I have so much privilege. It kind of feels overwhelming. But delights are like, oh my gosh, my morning coffee cup, when I was walking over here to get set up for the podcast, there was just like somebody driving by, like blasting some like Motley Crue. And I was like, that's like a little delight, this little moment. And so it's like delights are great because they're just tiny, they're just these moments where your heart's like, oh, like warm, happy feelings, right? And the act of noticing them it doesn't seem like it, but what you're really doing is practicing over time, right? Just like you do, sprints or I don't know, kicking I was never a soccer player, so I'm going to mess up all my soccer metaphors, right? But just like you do that kind of practice in athletics, the act of noticing delights makes it easier for your brain to notice them, right? You're kind of retraining what your mind naturally pays attention to. So if your brain is like on the lookout for things that you're grateful for, things that are cool, things that are delightful, you'll kind of train away what's often called a negativity bias. Our minds just evolutionarily naturally notice the negative stuff, but you can kind of train that away with a little bit of practice. And so that's kind of finding delights, finding gratitude. I think that can be a big mindset shift for a lot of us. Another one that I think sounds like, perfectionists or folks who are kind of their whole career and how they approach things were suffering. I think a big mindset shift there that can really help is to develop a little bit of self-compassion, which sounds like wooey and whatever, but really it's just the practice of talking to yourself and giving yourself the benefit of the doubt, just like you would with a good friend or someone you really cared about. And so Kristen Neff, who's a researcher at UT Austin, does a lot of great work on self-compassion. And she sort of defines it as having these 3 steps. One is sort of mindfulness, like, I'm struggling right now. This sucks right now. I'm feeling really overwhelmed right now. You sort of notice where you are and what could be tough. You kind of mindfully notice that. The second step is what she calls common humanity, which is especially hard for the perfectionist, but, practice, you get good at it. Common humanity is just, and that makes sense that I'm overwhelmed and struggling because I'm just human. I'm not like a superhuman robot. I'm not like the perfect, athlete that's never going to make a mistake. I'm actually human, and it makes sense that I'm going through this. And it's a normative experience. I'm not alone, right? That's the common humanity step. And then the final step is what she calls self-kindness. This is kind of treating yourself like you treat a friend. You say, what do I need right now? What can I take off my plate, right? And this idea of treating yourself like you treat a friend, I think, is a helpful way to frame self-compassion for perfectionists, because I think sometimes perfectionists confuse self-compassion with self-indulgence. They think that being nice to yourself is like just letting yourself off the hook, just screwing up. But really what self-compassion is it's like being a really good coach, like a really empathic coach. Like if you were actively screwing up, your coach wouldn't be like, that's fine, I'll just pretend it's okay. But they would be like, hey, what is up? What is going on? Can we talk about this and like figure it out? A good empathic coach would go into like problem solving mode, but not accusing mode, right? And that's the sort of attitude you bring to yourself. It's not like you're kind of letting yourself off the hook if you're really screwing up, but you come in there with like a little bit of compassion and problem solving rather than just like beating yourself up all the time. And self-compassion can be an incredibly powerful mindset. Research shows that it allows you to treat your future self better. So you eat healthier, you exercise more when you're a little bit more self-compassionate. If you have a big project, you're less likely to procrastinate because you're not beating yourself up. So it makes it easier to do hard things. And self-compassion research shows can actually help even in just really extreme situations of suffering like trauma. Kristen Neff has done work with Afghan and Iraqi veterans who've been in combat. And she found that teaching them these self-compassion strategies mean they get lower rates of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, even going through trauma. So it's kind of like, it's like a really good strategy, but is one that can be really hard for perfectionists. So it too kind of takes a little bit of time and practice to get used to.
Yeah. And I think what it boils down to is just giving yourself grace, which I'm learning in real time. And I say this all the time, there's so many people that have opinions of me and my performance always.
Yeah.
The days of making a mistake and walking off the field and not thousands, if not millions of people watching it and having an opinion on it, it's been a weird process growing up in a space of social media with people having opinions of you, and then you internalize the way they see you. And it's just this really wild spiral that I had to go through as a performer, player, perfectionist, all these things. And what I did know is no one was harder on me than me.
Yeah.
And I really had to learn grace. I had to really humanize myself a lot because I am not a perfect person. I am not a perfect athlete, and I am going to make mistakes all the time. I really hold on to that grace part. I really hold on to understanding boundaries, which I'm learning to set now. Because for every 500 beautiful, nice comments that people think I'm so lovely and I'm doing great work and they're so encouraging, the 2, 3, 4, 5 comments that absolutely destroy me, I weirdly hold on to.
Completely. I mean, that is the negativity bias, right? Like your brain can see hundreds and hundreds of nice things, and the one terrible thing, it's like, oh, let me lock on to that. We do the same thing with comparison, right? You could be a better
Mm.
player than you are a better player than literally billions of other people on the planet. But the one or two players that are better than you, like that will stick in your mind. And whatever your comparison is at the time, your brain will lock on to the one that makes you feel worse about yourself. I was doing some training with professional basketball players, and I was showing the power, like how bad our brains are at comparison. And I was asking them, like, what's the comparison point for, like, free throws? And it was like, oh, that's Steph Curry, because he's so good at it. Like, I
Yeah.
was like, what's the comparison point for, I don't know how much people are earning at the time. Steph was making a lot, and they're like, oh yeah, Steph Curry again. And I was like, okay, what's the comparison point for height? And they're like, well, that's not Steph Curry, because he's kind of short. He's like, that's like Taco Phil, who's like really tall. I'm like, well, why did your brain let Steph off the hook for that one? Why didn't it like allow you to feel better because you're taller than him? It's like, that's just not how brains work. And
Hmm.
so if it's your performance at work, you're going to pick the highest performer at work. If it's your looks, you'll pick someone off social media, right? It's like whatever you are feeling is relevant to your identity at the time, you tend to pick comparison points that make you look the worst possible, right?
Mm.
And because, none of us are perfect, there's going to always be some dimension on which we're not, the best ever in the history of the universe. And that's just going to make us feel kind of crappy. There's a very famous study on this kind of form of comparison that was done actually with athletes. So it was with Olympic athletes on the medal stand, just asking kind of who's happiest. And of course, you predict, like, when you win a gold medal, you're going to be the most happy. It's the gold medalists who are the most happy. And they are happy. But interestingly, if you look at the silver medalists, they're not kind of second happiest. They're actually showing emotions on the medal stand that look like contempt, deep sadness, grief, right?
Hmm.
And you're like, oh my gosh, you're second best in the world. You're taking home a medal for your country. Why do you feel so crappy? Well, they feel crappy in part because of this comparison. There's a really salient thing that they didn't get,
Mm.
which is the gold medal. But what's interestingly is if you look at bronze medalists, you might predict that they'd be experiencing even more contempt and grief than the silver medalists, but not so. Their salient comparison isn't gold. They weren't going to, they're multiple points away or multiple seconds away or whatever, in whatever sport they're in. Their salient comparison is like, oh my gosh, if I was just a little bit worse, I wouldn't get any medal at all. And so it turns out that
Mm.
if you look at on the stand, the bronze medalists on average are like smiling more, like feeling this relief. They're feeling ecstatic, even though objectively they actually did worse than silver medalists. They're feeling better. And so my joke from, these studies with Olympic athletes is, instead of looking for the silver lining, we all have to look for the bronze lining, right? We need to look at the spot
Oh.
where, it might not be as good as we are. Like, find comparisons that kind of make you feel a little bit better about your own identity.
And I love what you said there. And it's so important because, I'm curious of what you think because it's important, in the culture of sport is that, really contradicts what we're trying to talk about and what we're unlearning in a lot of ways because they teach you to suffer. They teach you that that's how you become the best. And now that I'm on the other side, I'm like, holy shit, I have so much unlearning to do because of it and because of how it now affects how I move in the real world. How does that make you think based on all the studies you've done, based on your life commitment in this, happiness section of psychology? Like I just feel now that I think back of my younger self, I'm like, oh my gosh, no wonder I can't sleep. I always think someone's working
Yeah,
harder
yeah.
than me. No wonder I have this weird complex that nothing is ever enough, that how I do anything is how I do everything. And like, I run these things through my head because I'm so branded to do so. And it really does affect my overall well-being and happiness and how I show up for my friends, my work, my family, my kids. And I'm curious what you think about this because it is a part of our culture as athletes to be brainwashed to suffer because that's what makes us great.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a theory, right? That what makes athletes great is that you have to force them to suffer. And we have this kind of theory in a lot of performance careers and domains, right? I did some work with retired Navy SEALs, and they have,
Mm.
similar kinds of phrases, eat the pain, right? These
Oh,
kinds of
yeah.
things, right? But it raises a question of like, is that the best way to perform, right? It turns out that if you look at performance data, what you often find is that people's overall levels of mental health correlate with their performance in all kinds of different domains, including athletics, right? And I think we have this assumption that like, suffer, 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 no pain, no gain, push through it is the right move. But it might be that like recognizing your own boundaries, recognizing your limitations, that might actually make athletes who not only perform really well, but might have longevity in the sport, in part because they
Mm.
continue to enjoy it and they don't hate it, right? And I do think there are some athletes out here there that despite their excellence have trained in ways that are like less kind of, eat the pain and more like self-compassion. On my show, I talked to the Olympic figure skater, Michelle Kwan, and was surprised that, even though she just like achieved such, excellence in her sport, she kind of was able to maintain a little bit of a journey mindset. Somehow she kind of fought off all those arrival fallacy kinds of things.
Mm.
And she had these lovely examples of it. She talked about when she would go to the Olympics, her favorite part was that she would get to skate across the ice where they had the Olympic rings embedded in. And she talked about like skating over those
Mm.
colors and just trying to say, I'm just going to be present with, like, I don't care about what happens. I just kind of want to be present with this. Right. And so I think somehow there are excellent athletes who've avoided this suffering mindset. I think as a culture, we're not good at that. And we push because
Mhm.
we think that that's the only way to become excellent. But I think more and more as people see the research, they realize actually you perform better, like with self-compassion. Actually, you have longer careers, right? Longer, more
Mhm.
successful careers if you treat yourself well. And so my hope is that a new generation of coaches who see these real performance data are going to say, hang on, maybe we can achieve the same kind of performance in sport, but do it with a little bit more compassion, like a kind of smart
Yes.
way that kind of understands psychology better.
Oh, and I love that. And I wish I knew more while I was young because I agree with you. I think if I could have found more happiness and joy through the journey, I I think I would have been a better teammate.
Mm-hmm.
I think I
Mm-hmm.
would have been a better human. I think I would have been a better person outside of sports too. I felt that I carried that mindset in everything I did. And you just brought up something that really made me think. You said something about boundaries. And I don't think we've really touched on that with the landscape of social media. Let's pull away a little bit outside of sport. The current landscape of our country, new presidency, things are bonkers right now. It's really affecting everyone's overall well-being, mental health. As a queer woman who has adopted two Black children, I'm terrified most days. I got to be really honest. Um, how do we start setting boundaries? How do we help protect ourselves in a landscape where, we're always picking this damn thing up and checking what everyone else is doing? The country's on fire. Everything is just like, whoa, spiraling absolutely out of control. And it does affect the way we move. It does affect the way we show up. It does affect the way we see ourselves. How do we set boundaries? Like, how do we really figure out a way to protect our peace?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step gets back to something we spoke a little bit about before, which is like mindfully noticing these negative emotions. I think it helps to kind of notice what you're feeling after you're on your phone, right? So say scroll through Instagram or look at what the news is showing you. And, at least I'm like you, like the last few
Mm-hmm.
weeks when we're having this conversation, it's been like utter terror, utter frustration, and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of sense of loneliness and disconnection, just like yucky feelings, right? But I think there's a moment to take a breath and notice those feelings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because they're not, this is what the administration is. This is kind of where we find ourselves. Breath, notice, and ask the question, okay, what do I need right now? How can I take
Mm.
care of myself? Right. And often what you realize is like, it's not another half hour scrolling through the same news feed, right? It's, to put the phone away and go spend time with your kids, right? It's to put the phone away and just like take a deep breath, maybe move your body around a little bit so you can get
Mhm.
some endorphins, right? Like it's really asking yourself, what can I do to take care of myself? And a very practical kind of set of strategies that I often use, that I teach my students, is this very specific meditation practice that was popularized by the meditation teacher Tara Brach. It goes by the acronym of RAIN,
Mm.
RAIN, which stands for recognize, allow, investigate, and nurture. And so, let's say you're scrolling through the news feed and you see what's going on in the world right now, and you just, that's
Mhm.
when you say, okay, do a quick RAIN, take a step away, recognize what are the specific emotions I'm going through, and really try to categorize them. Like this time it's just like, it's anxiety, or it's anger, or it's just overwhelm. Like I just feel like the problems of the world can't fit with everything I have on my plate. Just kind of notice and try to categorize what you're feeling. That's step one, recognize. Then you say, the next one is the hard step. You say allow. Just going to allow those feelings to be there just as they are, right? I think this is the spot where your training as an athlete comes in, right? You're good at allowing pain or allowing things. You're going to allow these emotions and sit with them and look at them, right?
Mm.
But you give your brain something to do while you're doing that, and that's the I step, investigate. You say, okay, deep breath. When I'm feeling this sense of overwhelm and anxiety, where do I experience it in my body, right? You really kind of get
Mm.
deep. Is it in my chest? Maybe my brow is furrowed, whatever. And the reason this step works is, there's so much work in clinical psychology and clinical training that talks about how our emotions, our cravings, they're sort of like a wave, right? When we first start to pay attention to them, they'll kind of go up and they might feel more intense when you're really looking at it. But if we
Mhm.
give our emotions time, they'll just sort of pass like a wave. This is often a process that's called urge surfing. And that investigate step lets you do that because you're looking directly at it like, oh, my chest, my body's fluttering, my stomach feels gross, but you're like feeling that thing head on. And
Mm.
inevitably in a couple minutes, usually like 3 to 5 minutes, a lot of the science suggests that will pass. But you don't stop there. There's one last step of RAIN, and that's the N, nurture. You say,
Mm.
what can I take off my plate? What do I need right now? Sometimes those answers will be inconvenient, right? It's like, I got to ask somebody for help, right? I need to, cancel these meetings that feel important. I need to really take a break. But kind of give yourself that grace and kind of do that. I think RAIN is a really nice way to notice the bad things in the
Mm.
world, recognize and allow, like, we might not be able to solve them, and that sucks. But deep breath, let's feel that emotion and kind of let it take its course.
And that's important what you just said, because I do find that the times I get the most overwhelmed are when I can't control things.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of this world I can't control. So I think that's the spiral in me where I'm like, oh my God, that's when I get uncomfortable. That's when I start crawling out of my skin. That's when it's like, I can't directly impact this, but it's affecting me so much. So I love that you suggest that. And I hope, everyone watching and listening, can take something away here, because there's no question why your class is the most
No.
popular class in Yale. What is it? 300
Plus
years,
something, yes.
something. The work is so important. And I want to first and foremost say thank you for the way you serve your community, your students, all of us. Like I love your podcast, the Happiness Lab. It's such an important practice you've dedicated your life to. And like, I want to end there a little bit and talk about that, because so much of what you do is serving other people. So I'm going to, remove that for a second. Like, the legacy you're leaving behind through your work is so beautiful. It's so powerful. And I wonder if you ever take a step back and realize the work you've done to bless all of these people on this pursuit and journey of happiness. Like, do you think about that? What is the legacy you want to leave behind? Like, what's next for you? You've done so much in this space. And I'm so grateful for your work. And I needed to tell you that
Oh,
personally.
thank you. It's great to hear, especially coming from you. It's nice when
Yeah.
fans of fans, but yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think, yeah, as I think one great thing about the work that I've done, and I think you'll see this, on your podcast, Wide Open, is that this act of helping other people, sharing good stories, helping your viewers and your listeners, it winds up helping you too, right? It really gives you
Yes.
a sense of meaning and purpose. It forces you, when you're sharing these kinds of ideas and strategies, to make sure you're adopting them yourself. And so,
Mm.
I'm proud of the work I've done. I feel incredibly humbled that it's helped so many people, but I'm also just like so happy that I get to do it because I get something very selfishly out of it too, right? I get these strategies and get the great feeling and meaning and purpose that comes from this work.
Oh, I love it. And I'm very grateful for you. And I will continue following you. Please tell everyone, the listeners and everyone tuning in, where they can access your work. Not all of us are lucky enough to go to Yale, but the good thing is everyone can access you and your podcast and your work. Please let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, well, they can subscribe to the Happiness Lab, which is my podcast, wherever they get their podcasts. And if you want to take a short version of the Yale class that I teach, you can check it out on Coursera.org. It's called The Science of Wellbeing, and it's freely available to anyone who wants to take it.
Thank you for being wide open. Thank you for being vulnerable. And thank you for showing up today. I think this was a really great conversation, and I think a lot of people will learn something new and take something away. So, Dr. Santos, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
And I hope to see you down the line. I will definitely tell all my athlete friends, if they haven't tuned into your work, they're missing out. So again, thank you for being here this week, and we'll see everyone next week.